Hi to everybody. I want just to say thank you for RSVPing. I thought to just initially put it out there that we're just waiting for as many people to just come online, and then at 1:05 we're going to start the session. I hope that's fine with everybody. But that's literally just in 2 minutes. So yeah, thank you. Okay, just as we are about to start, I thought perhaps let me just sort of outline what this week's program is about and the teaching. So this is usually the department, Rose University Department of Political International Studies, yearly teach-in. This year we are hosting it with ICE, African Institute of South Africa, hosted inside the HSRC, working alongside Vuyo Mjimba. And this year we are looking at broadly, I'm sure you've seen the themes, looking at the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So we are going to kick off this week with he's Secretary General of the Free Trade Agreement, Mr. Mene. And for those who are also interested in other programs, tomorrow we'll be looking at the issue of development and wealth creation with Dr. Tabili Yoga. And Wednesday we are going to look at the issue of the state of industrialization on the continent with Ms. Diana James. So Diana James is going to take us through that take. And on the last day, on the fourth day, we are going to look at or rather be talking to again one of the co-organizers, Dr. Vuyo Mjimba, who's going to look at the African Free Continental Agreement from the research that he's been involved with. So please do tune in for those who are able to come in for the full week. An email has been sent with all the Zoom links, so please watch out for that. But I just thought, let me just start with that so that we can preface this discussion. But today's one is just going to look at the overall governance and sort of legal framework of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and how, of course, the Secretary General is going to then delve into that discussion. I'd love to leave it there and perhaps then start with that conversation. Just as a reminder, the first 20 minutes or so will be his presentation, and thereafter, either 30 to 40 minutes will be Q&A session for everybody. Just put your questions, obviously, on the chat. There is a person, Ben, who's going to be our administrator for the day, who's going to look at all of those questions and then collate them through me, and then I'll obviously post them to the Secretary General, at least for those who will be on Facebook. But for those who are here, will be able to ask the videos directly without me interrupting. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Dr. Wamken.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tapelo, and thank you to the department for inviting me today for this session. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I should say at the outset that I wish I could stay longer than 30 to 40 minutes, but I have another engagement that I have to run off to. So I will try to be as concise as I can so that we can have more time for a discussion and in the question and answer session. So again, thank you for inviting me. I think the topic that you have chosen in terms of the governance structure that underpins the African Continental Free Trade Area is very, very timely. We negotiated this agreement over about a period of 4 to 4.5 years. And the objective of this agreement is laid out in, if you look at the genesis of regional integration in Africa in the Abuja Treaty, it sets it out very clearly that Africa should go through various stages and various phases of integration. So the Abuja Treaty envisages a linear approach to integration in Africa. And so now that we have an African Continental Free Trade Area as one of the steps of integration in Africa, we are progressing in line with the vision of the founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity, and that is to have an African continent that is united, an African continent that is able to overcome market fragmentation, is able to overcome smallness of national economies, has a single set of rules for trade and investment. And all of these very, very critical aspects of regional integration are foreseen in the Abuja Treaty. And so that is why I say that we have already, as Africa, we have already taken the step towards the integration of Africa, a very significant step towards the integration of Africa. With the final step, of course, being an Africa that has a single market, and after that, a monetary union. These are the various integration models that are foreseen in the Abuja Treaty. The second interesting part of what informs the African Continental Free Trade Area from a governance point of view is the Lagos Plan of Action. The Lagos Plan of Action is very important because it really is Africa's blueprint for economic development, for industrial development, for job creation, and for improving the lives of Africans. And when you look at it, at the Lagos Plan of Action, it really was visionary in the sense that it identified in very, very clear terms the shortcomings of Africa's economic structure, what we needed to do in order to correct that. And so all African countries who were signatories to the Lagos Plan of Action were expected to take active steps towards implementation of the Lagos Plan of Action and the interventions that were identified in the Lagos Plan of Action. The third very important framework, governance framework to the AfCFTA is, of course, recently, as you know, Agenda 2063, the Africa that we want. And the African Continental Free Trade Area is one of the 13 flagship projects that have been identified under Agenda 2063, the Africa that we want. There are others that are equally important and that are complementary to the African Continental Free Trade Area, but I think for the purposes of this discussion, it's very important to underscore that the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, in a sense, one could say, provided the foundations of, in recent times anyway, provided the foundations of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And so we always refer to it as one of the very, very important founding documents of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is why the building that I'm sitting in the African Union, it is so very, very important for us to consistently make that direct reference to the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, because it is a very, very successful flagship project of the African Union amongst the 13 that have been identified, again, with a view to regional integration, advancing regional integration in Africa. The fourth pillar, as I call it, is which is a very important pillar of the governance structure, the underlying governance structure of the African Continental Free Trade Area, is a document that we refer to as the Boosting Intra-Africa Trade Action Plan, which was agreed to and adopted by the summit in 2012, the Assembly of Heads of States. And it seeks to, once again, very similar to the Lagos Plan of Action, but except it's more focused on industrial development. It diagnoses, it provides a diagnosis of where are Africa's shortcomings, why are we over-reliant on the export of primary commodities, why do we have a very narrow export base and export capacity, why do we have deficits in productive manufacturing in Africa? And why are we not able to export value-added goods amongst ourselves? And why is it that intra-Africa trade is at 18%, which is, when you compare to other regions, is one of the lowest figures that we have seen. And so I think the Boosting Intra-Africa Action Plan, read together with the Lagos Plan of Action, really set out a very, very compelling industrial development focus for Africa, which is what the task of the Secretariat is going to be. Now, the Assembly of Heads of States, when they decided in their wisdom that we need to accelerate market integration in Africa, we need to accelerate regional integration in Africa, they decided, once again, in accordance with the Abuja Treaty, that an African free trade area is a tool that will expedite that objective, or meeting that objective, and that will facilitate Africa's industrial development. And so I think when we talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area, all of these founding documents that I referred to are very, very important pillars from a governance framework. And we in the Secretariat are duty bound to not only to refer to them, but to seek to meet the objectives that are set out in all of these documents. What is interesting about where we are as the African Continental Free Trade Area is COVID-19, and how COVID-19 has, like in all other organizations, how it has compelled us to rethink integration in Africa and the priorities for integration in Africa. For example, in the area of industrial development, as I referred to a bit earlier, it's very clear. COVID-19 has clearly demonstrated that Africa has a significant weakness in industrial capacity, in industrial output. We import all of these products that are essential for fighting the pandemic. We have been importing them from abroad until very, very recently, where we have seen some innovation in production of ventilators and so on. But for the most part, what it exposed is that when there was a disruption in global supply chains, a disruption in global output, Africa suffered, and Africa suffered greatly because we had to import all of these products. And if you look to what the Lagos Plan of Action directed, it directed that we have to urgently, and this is, I mean, the Lagos Plan of Action is from the early 80s, it directed that we urgently should accelerate Africa's industrial development. And so we believe that as much as COVID-19 is a crisis, it is also an opportunity for us to expedite and to accelerate some of the objectives of market integration that we have always identified throughout the African continent. And so I think the fact that we come from such a rich history of policy foundation is going to help us as a secretariat, so that we have a compass and we have a direction that we are moving very quickly towards. Now, from a structure point of view, we as a secretariat are accountable to the Assembly of Heads of States. I was elected by the Assembly of Heads of States. But in between, there is also another layer, and that is Ministers of Trade, what we call the Council of Ministers responsible for trade, who of course work very closely with their counterparts, the Executive Council of the Assembly of Heads of States, of the African Union. And then of course, all of us report to the Assembly of Heads of States that convenes typically twice a year, once in an ordinary session and the second occasion in an extraordinary session. So from a governance point of view, we are accountable to whether it is for budget, for finance, for the structure itself to be approved. The ultimate decision-making body is the Assembly of Heads of States. As you know, the agreement entered into force. The African Continental Free Trade Area entered into force on the 30th of May last year. We now have 28 countries that have ratified the agreement, which is the fastest ever ratification in the history of the African Union. Out of 55 countries, 54 signed the agreement. There's only one country that is yet to sign the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And so we see this as a very, very encouraging symbol of political commitment and political will to move the objectives of integration in Africa, to significantly advance them, so that we all benefit from the inclusive, the promise of inclusive development and inclusive growth that this African Continental Free Trade Area has the potential to provide to the whole of Africa. And so in terms of universality of the membership of the agreement, all African countries negotiated it, but not all African countries have ratified it, but we're moving towards the direction of all countries being state parties, what we call state parties to this agreement. There will be challenges in the implementation of the agreement. We know that Africa has very, very different, there are differentials in levels of economic development, from Somalia's GDP per capita of 120 US dollars to the opposite end of the extreme, where you have Equatorial Guinea at $22,000 per annum in terms of GDP per capita. 5 different legal systems, different languages, different levels of industrial development and industrial capacity. And so all of these things, of course, are going to create challenges. One of the biggest challenges that we're going to face in implementation of the agreement is there will be some countries that will be immediate beneficiaries because of their already existing industrial capacity, their relative development in terms of industrial capacity. And these countries, some of them are Egypt, Morocco, Kenya, South Africa. There may be others, but they will definitely be immediate beneficiaries by virtue of a country's current level of development. So our challenge will be to make sure that the gains and the benefits of the agreement over time, that they are all inclusive, and that we have benefits that that accrue also to the smallest countries, the less industrialized countries in Africa. And there are specific examples of how this can be done by ensuring that we expand throughout the African continent, we expand industrial development, we create centers of manufacturing and centers of excellence throughout the African continent in a range of different sectors, such as agro-processing, automobiles, that are very, very labor intensive, so that we create jobs for millions and millions of Africans. So we are very hopeful that this agreement is going to present Africa with an opportunity to significantly advance our economic development objectives, that we're able to overcome our smallness of national economies, and we create ultimately that we create one market for Africa, and that we as Africans and as Africa become a very compelling investor environment, that we create jobs in Africa so that young people stop dying and being buried deep in the depths of the Mediterranean Ocean in search of jobs and opportunities in Europe. This agreement is a tool, amongst others, of course. It is a tool for us to significantly to push back the frontiers of poverty in Africa, and to improve the livelihoods of many, many Africans through investment and trade on the African continent, and boosting intra-Africa trade, and placing Africa in 20 to 30 years' time as one of the leading continents in terms of growth and economic development. And we have already seen signals that this is possible. If you look at 2019 figures from the IMF, out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, 6 were in Africa. Yes, from a low base, but growing nonetheless. Very vibrant, very dynamic markets that were growing on average between 6 and 9% per annum. And so we want to nurture this success story, and we want to make sure that the African Continental Free Trade Area is at the center and drives Africa's economic development going forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to the questions and to the discussion that follows. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ntata for that. Actually, yeah, very informative given the earlier documents that you had talked about. I just want to see whether there are any questions, though, without me sort of coming with my own question. Does anybody have any questions? You can post your questions on the chat, or you can ask directly. So there's a question on, could you comment on intra-regional trade statistics? But yeah. The question is just, could you comment on intra-regional trade statistics? And there is another one on how has the pandemic affected the trajectory and timing of the negotiations? Yeah, I just unmute. I think you need to unmute.
We can take a cluster of 3 questions.
Okay, I do have one question. So I hope that's okay with the group. So for me, how did the Secretariat be able to sort of manage the potential of sort of other bigger countries or regional hegemons not to disproportionately benefit, vis-a-vis other smaller economies on the continent? At least when it comes to trade, how will you be able to facilitate that trade does not disproportionately benefit the bigger countries as opposed to the smaller economies?
Well, let me start with your question, Tapelo. I mean, there will be, as I said earlier, there will be in the short term immediate beneficiaries.
Yeah.
And those are countries that are already relatively industrialized. It is countries that already have an export base and are already exporting goods, value-added production, semi-value-added goods. So those countries will be the immediate beneficiaries.
Okay.
The countries that will maybe take longer to transition, we will have to. We are in fact devising strategies to assist them in the implementation of the agreement. First, we're going to have an adjustment facility. So we will provide, working with AfCFTA, we will provide a facility that countries can draw to if they experience revenue shortfalls as a result of liberalization under the agreement. And we are mobilizing close to $1 billion along with AfCFTA to make sure that that the countries that may suffer short-term injury as a result of liberalization under the agreement, that there is a facility available for them. And we want that facility to be targeted to productive investment in sectors, in particular countries that have identified themselves as suffering as a result of the liberalization they've undertaken. So we have made provision for this. The second provision we're making for this is through industrial development, acceleration of industrial development. We will make sure that we have established centers of excellence, regional value chains across the African continent, as I said earlier, in different areas such as automobiles, agro-processing. We will make sure that they are that countries can be part of these value chains that will require significant investment, of course, from the private sector. And we are already in discussions with the private sector about that. So I believe that with these two, these combined, the facility, but also establishment of value chains in the long term, we will be addressing this, this differential between countries that are somewhat already industrialized and countries that at the moment are not. Now, the second question, the pandemic COVID-19 has affected the implementation of the agreement. You may be aware that we had intended that the 1st of July will be, 1st of July 2020 will be the date on which we start trading under the preferences of the agreement. But of course, that has not been possible because out of 55 countries in Africa, 42 are either in a full or a partial lockdown, or were until about a week or two ago. Borders were closed, goods could not transit through borders, even the services sector was affected. So we had to, with the permission of the heads of states, shift the deadline for trading to the 1st of January 2021, to give us time to adjust to the new conditions of COVID-19, but also, more importantly, so that governments can have time to focus on fighting the pandemic, which I believe is quite sensible and quite responsible thing to do, to save the lives of Africans. That should be the priority. And once things have been stabilized, we will resume our work, and we will redouble our efforts at implementation of the agreement from the 1st of January 2021. Now, the last question about intra-regional trade statistics. Where I think when you look at the statistics around intra-regional trade in Africa, they of course vary, with SADC being the largest contributor of intra-Africa trade, followed by the East African Community, and then the West African region, ECOWAS, is the third largest contributor to intra-Africa trade. The aggregate, as I said, the aggregate is 18% intra-Africa trade, and a very low percentage of less than 2% is Africa's contribution to global trade and global output, which is very, very low when you consider the fact that a country like Singapore, by itself, has a contribution of a little over 1% to global trade and global output. So these are some of the things that we want to correct through this agreement, and we believe it has the potential. If we establish the industrial base that is required, if we establish the productive capacity that is required, by the year 2030, it is possible that we can double intra-Africa trade from the current low percentage where it stands now. I think those will be the three questions for now, Thapelo. We can take another round. We've got a few more minutes. We can take another final round of questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for the time as well. There are questions. I'm not sure if you may have already answered, but I'll ask the question nonetheless. It's on how is the integration between the free trade agreement and various regional economic groups already in existence going to pan out? That's the first one. And then there is the question around what is the incentive for the private sector to sell to other African countries if the monetary systems are not in sync? Will we use the dollar to trade? And then the third question is from Musa, is how does the free trade agreement intersect with the protocol on the free movement of persons? In effect, how do you see the free movement of people and economic integration linked? Okay, no, thank you very much again. Very good questions, all of them. I mentioned earlier the Abuja Treaty. The Abuja Treaty envisages that at some point that Africa will be a customs union if we follow a linear, if we follow the linear model of integration. So we will move from being a free trade area to being a customs union. Once we are a customs union, the regional economic communities, if you follow the logic of the Abuja Treaty, the regional economic communities will be folded into the African Union Customs Union. This is the classic model of regional integration. I'm not suggesting they will disappear.
each regional economic community may remain, but dealing more with a sort of coordination and the political regional coordination efforts. But the core of trade policy will be undertaken under the African Union, Customs Union. This is what the Abuja Treaty envisages. We, in the African Continental Free Trade Area, we say that we are building on the regional economic communities. We're building on the acquis, the existing acquis of the regional economic communities, and the progressive liberalization that they have achieved thus far. So they are a very, very important part of rolling out of the African Continental Free Trade Area, because we make provision for them right there in the agreement, in the AfCFTA, and as I say, also in the Abuja Treaty. So there will be a complementarity. There will be there are some things that are done at the level of regional economic communities. For example, the mechanism that we have on resolving what we call NTBs, that mechanism is vested with the regional economic communities. And so we do rely on the mechanisms, on the infrastructure of the regional economic communities in some cases, because there are certain things that you cannot do without the regional economic communities. But I want to stress that based on the Abuja Treaty, the vision is that Africa must be, after this AfCFTA, free trade area, Africa must be a customs union. Now, the question around the currency with which we conduct trade, we are working with AfCFTA to develop a platform for payments and settlement in support of trading under the AfCFTA. And so we expect that by the end of next year, we will have made significant progress in implementing this payments platform, which will support the AfCFTA, trading under the AfCFTA. In other words, you will be able to transact, to send money. If you are trading under the AfCFTA, you will be able to send money from Kenya using your shillings to Nigeria. The counterparty will receive the payment in Nigerian naira. You will send shillings, and there will be an intermediary platform which will be supported and be the backstop for the transaction itself. This will be using local currency to move away from the US dollar. So we are working with with AfCFTA to make sure that this platform is operational in support of trading under the AfCFTA. The private sector is of course a very important part of our work. We have engagements with the private sector twice a year. We have the AfCFTA Business Forum, and we also talk to individual private sector, whether it's financial services providers, manufacturers. We talk to them also individually. But there is a formal recognition of the role of the private sector through a decision of the Assembly of Heads of States. The last question on the free movement of goods. This is not intended to be an instrument for facilitating free movement of persons. The Free Movement of Persons protocol is a standalone protocol. It has no relation to the AfCFTA. One is a trade agreement. The other one is a trade agreement governed by trade law. The other one is an immigration instrument governed by individual countries' immigration laws. So the two are different, and by design. We do not want to mix trade with immigration issues. However, in the Trade and Services Protocol of the AfCFTA, we make provision for movement of business persons across a range of categories, whether you're a graduate trainee, whether you are a business consultant, all of these different categories of persons, natural persons who are business people, they will have a right to move around the continent pursuant to the Protocol on Trade and Services and the objectives of regional integration and the objective of boosting intra-Africa trade. So one is very, very distinct. It is embedded in trade law. You will not be able to immigrate using on the basis of the AfCFTA. You will not be able to assert your rights of asylum seeking under international law using the AfCFTA, because these are two different legal instruments and they are intended to be as such. There is, of course, a complementarity between the two, particularly if all state parties to the free movement of persons, if everybody becomes a state party, then obviously that facilitates a greater movement of persons, and that also stimulates intra-Africa trade. But for the moment, that is not our intention. So Tapelo, I think I answered all the questions. I'm happy for you to send through other questions, but I'm conscious of time for this session today.
I mean, well, thank you for that. There is just one more question. I think I haven't seen any other questions. I'm hoping that perhaps you could just take this last question then. Is that fine with you?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question is, what instruments are there to avoid industrialization that relies on cheap labor and protects African workers?
We don't. There's no trade agreement that that seeks to regulate labor, except if you are negotiating with the US. There's no trade agreement that is intended to do that, because each country under the agreement has the right to regulate, what we call domestic regulation. And part of what the question is asking, in fact, the entirety of the question relates to a country's labor laws. It relates to a country's labor regulatory framework. We don't seek to get into that space. Okay. The right to regulate domestic regulation is sacrosanct, and I don't think any member of the African Union would ever agree to a supranational regulation of things like labor. I don't think that beyond what obtains already in the ILO, in the International Labour Organization, and the conventions under the International Labour Organization, I don't think that it is appropriate for a trade agreement to seek to regulate that area. It's a very, very sensitive area that is done at a national level. Okay. No, thank you. I think you were able to, looking at the comments, people were happy with the answers that you gave. So thank you for that, Ntate Mgele. But also on behalf of the department, I know you're a bit busy and you need to move on to your next appointment. Thank you also on behalf of the from the department side for also honoring the invitation, and most importantly, kickstarting of the teaching series. Yeah, I'd like to thank you for that. Okay, Thank you very much. And I wish you the best of luck for the rest of the week.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you to everybody. And yeah, I'm about
Sorry, there are two hands. Maybe we can speak. We still have a few minutes. Sorry to interject. I saw one hand from Sally and one from Sipogas, I think. Sorry, I was watching closely. Maybe they can ask their questions, unless if they don't want. Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
No problem. I'm happy to hear.
No hands. We're just saying thank you.
Okay.
All right. Okay then. Bye-bye.